Before we dive in, viewer discretion is advised. This content is for entertainment purposes.
What happens when the hosts of America's most controversial talk show try to corner the man who plays Jesus Christ on television? What unfolds is nothing short of extraordinary, a masterclass in grace under fire that left Joy Behar and her co-hosts speechless, humbled, and completely unprepared for what they had just unleashed. Jonathan Roumie walked into The View's studio that morning as a guest promoting his hit series The Chosen. He walked out as something else entirely. A man who had just delivered one of the most powerful defenses of faith ever witnessed on daytime television. And the hosts? They never saw it coming. Before we dive into this incredible moment that's breaking the internet, understand this. What you're about to read isn't just another celebrity interview gone sideways. This is the moment when Hollywood's most famous portrayal of Jesus met the secular media establishment's skepticism head-on and demolished every attack with such profound conviction that even the studio audience, many of whom came in as skeptics, left as believers. This is the story of how Jonathan Roumie turned an attempted ambush into a revival meeting. The View's studio hummed with its usual pre-show energy. Audience members settled into their seats, chattering excitedly about seeing their favorite hosts in person. The lighting crew made final adjustments to the blazing studio lights. Cameras positioned themselves at strategic angles, ready to capture every moment of another episode of America's most-watched daytime talk show. Jonathan Roumie arrived backstage with his characteristic humility. Dressed in a simple but well-tailored suit, his appearance struck that perfect balance between approachable and professional. His longer hair and beard, maintained for his role as Jesus in The Chosen, gave him an unmistakable presence, but his warm smile and gentle demeanor put everyone around him at ease. Stage managers and production assistants found themselves drawn to him, struck by something they couldn't quite name. There was a peace about him, a calm that seemed almost otherworldly in the controlled chaos of a television production. He had been briefed by his publicist about The View's tendency toward confrontational interviews, especially when it came to topics of faith and religion. But Roumie, a man of deep and unshakable conviction, wasn't worried. He had faced hostile crowds before. He had stood firm in his beliefs through years of struggle in Hollywood, through poverty and rejection, through moments when giving up would have been easier than persevering. This interview would be no different. What Jonathan Roumie didn't know, what his team couldn't have known, was that the producers had specifically prepared questions designed to challenge, to provoke, to force him into defensive positions about religion, faith, and the controversial nature of claiming to portray Christ. They wanted conflict. They wanted viral moments. They wanted him rattled. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The interview began pleasantly enough. Roumie took his seat across from the panel, greeted by warm applause from the audience. Joy Behar smiled her practiced smile, the one that millions of viewers had learned could turn from welcoming to weaponized in seconds. Whoopi Goldberg offered genuine praise for The Chosen's impact. Sarah Haynes asked about the challenges of playing such an iconic figure. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and seemingly genuine interest. But those who knew The View really knew it, recognized what was happening. This was the setup, the calm before the storm. Joy Behar had been unusually quiet during the opening exchanges, letting her co-hosts establish rapport, create comfort, lower defenses. Her notes lay before her like ammunition waiting to be loaded. She barely touched her coffee. Her eyes tracked Roumie with an intensity that suggested she was waiting, calculating, preparing. And then, just when Jonathan Roumie seemed most relaxed, most comfortable, most at ease with the friendly conversation, Joy struck. "So, Jonathan," Joy began, her voice taking on that particular edge that regular viewers recognized immediately. She leaned forward, her smile transforming into something more predatory. "I have to ask you about something that's been bothering me." She paused for effect, letting the tension build. The clip we saw earlier shows Jesus speaking up for marginalized people, the poor, and so on. That's the Jesus we love, right? The subtle emphasis on "we love" hung in the air like a challenge. Roumie nodded politely, sensing the shift but maintaining his composure. "But," Joy continued, her voice rising slightly, "not everyone interprets that message the same way these days, do they? Religion in this country seems weaponized at times. As a man of deep faith, which you obviously are, does that frustrate you at all? All these people using Jesus to push their political agendas?" The audience fell silent. The friendly atmosphere evaporated instantly. This wasn't a question, it was an accusation wrapped in inquiry. Joy had just suggested that faith itself had become toxic, that believing deeply was somehow suspect, that Jonathan's own convictions might be part of the problem. The camera captured the moment perfectly. Roumie's expression didn't change to anger or defensiveness. Instead, something remarkable happened. His face softened, his eyes filled with compassion. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made everyone in the studio lean forward unconsciously. "You know, Joy," he began, his tone gentle but carrying absolute conviction. "In that clip, we see Jesus taking to task the Pharisees who had essentially perverted the law. They had taken faith and made it about the specificity in the letters of the law versus the heart of the law. They were following rules at the expense of the people those rules were meant to protect. There was injustice in that." He paused, letting his words settle. The studio was completely silent now. "And any time you see injustice taking place," Roumie continued, his voice growing stronger, "Jesus isn't going to be happy about that. So yes, when faith is weaponized, when it's used to harm rather than heal, to exclude rather than include, to condemn rather than redeem, that's not the Jesus I know. That's not the Jesus anyone should know." Joy leaned back slightly, momentarily thrown off her script. She had expected defensiveness, perhaps a retreat into religious platitudes. Instead, she had gotten something far more powerful. Genuine conviction backed by thoughtful theology. But she wasn't done, not by a long shot. "But doesn't it bother you," Joy pressed, her voice taking on a harder edge, "that you're playing someone that billions of people worship as God? I mean, you're an actor. You're pretending to be Jesus. Doesn't that feel a little blasphemous? Don't you worry that you're reducing the Son of God to entertainment?" The attack was direct now, no longer veiled in pleasant inquiry. Joy had just accused Jonathan Roumie of committing blasphemy for a paycheck, of trivializing the most sacred figure in Christianity for ratings and recognition. The other hosts shifted uncomfortably. Several audience members gasped audibly. This had crossed a line, and everyone felt it. But Jonathan Roumie didn't flinch. His expression remained peaceful, his posture open and unthreatened. When he responded, his voice carried a power that made the studio feel smaller, more intimate, as if he were speaking directly to each person individually. "Joy, I struggle to follow Jesus like anybody else who considers themselves a Christian," he said, his honesty disarming in its simplicity. "The struggle is part of it. And I think God knows what we struggle with, but we're still challenged to do what he would do in those situations." He leaned forward slightly, his intensity increasing without becoming aggressive. "I actually believe that. Not because it's convenient, not because it makes good television, but because it's true. And I think that belief, that genuine conviction, is what lends me credibility and authenticity in approaching this character. People don't respond to The Chosen because of great special effects or celebrity actors. They respond because they see something real, something authentic, something that speaks to the deepest parts of their souls." The audience was transfixed. Some had tears in their eyes. Others sat with mouths slightly open, completely absorbed in what was unfolding. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was something else entirely. But Joy wasn't finished. She had come prepared for a fight, and she wasn't going to let authentic faith derail her attack strategy. "Okay, but let's be real here," Joy said, her voice dripping with skepticism. "You have people who literally think you're Jesus. They try to confess their sins to you. They ask you to heal them. Doesn't that concern you? Aren't you worried about the psychological damage you might be causing these people who can't separate fiction from reality?" Sarah Haynes tried to interject with a softer question, sensing that Joy was pushing too hard, but Joy waved her off impatiently. She was locked in now, determined to expose what she saw as the dangerous delusion at the heart of religious entertainment. "I mean," Joy continued, her voice rising, "you're making money playing God. You're profiting off people's faith. How is that different from those televangelist scam artists who sell prayer cloths and healing water?" The comparison was devastating. Joy had just equated Jonathan Roumie with the worst kind of religious con artists, suggesting that The Chosen was nothing more than an elaborate grift exploiting vulnerable believers. The studio audience murmured with shock and disapproval. Even Whoopi looked uncomfortable, recognizing that Joy had gone from challenging to cruel. But Jonathan Roumie's response was nothing short of extraordinary. "Joy," he said, his voice remaining calm but carrying unmistakable steel. "Now, I'm not Jesus. I'm very clear about that. I remind people constantly my name is Jonathan, not Jesus. When people try to confess to me, I tell them, nope, save it for the priest. Because I'm not qualified to hear confessions. I'm not qualified to heal. I'm not qualified to save." He paused, his eyes meeting Joy's directly, unflinchingly. "But here's what I can do. I can point people toward the real Jesus. I can help them see that following Christ isn't about perfection. It's about surrender. It's about recognizing that we're all broken, we're all struggling, and we all need grace. The chosen doesn't make Jesus smaller or more trivial. It makes him more accessible, more relatable, more real to people who have been told their whole lives that faith is about rules and judgment rather than love and redemption." The power in his words was undeniable. Several audience members were openly crying now. Even some of the crew members had stopped what they were doing, drawn in by the raw authenticity of what was unfolding. Joy shifted in her seat, clearly feeling the room turn against her aggressive approach. But she had one more weapon in her arsenal. One more attack, designed to expose what she saw as the fundamental hypocrisy of religious celebrity. "So let me ask you this," Joy said, her voice taking on a mocking tone. "If you were to have a cup of coffee with Jesus you know, the real Jesus, what's the one question you would ask him? How did I do playing you on TV?" The question was designed to humiliate, to reduce Jonathan's faith to ego and vanity, to suggest that his entire spiritual journey was really just about validation for his performance. It was a trap, and everyone in the studio knew it. But Jonathan Roumie didn't fall for it. Instead, he did something unexpected. He smiled not with anger or defensiveness, but with genuine joy. And when he answered, his response left everyone in the studio stunned into silence. "How did I get it close?" he said softly, his voice filled with genuine wonder. "That's what I would ask. Not because I think I got it right, I know I didn't. I know I'm just scratching the surface of who he really is. But I would want to know, in all my imperfection, in all my brokenness, did I at least point people in the right direction? Did I help anyone see even a glimpse of your love, your mercy, your grace?" He paused, and when he continued, his voice cracked slightly with emotion. "Because that's all this is about, Joy. That's all it's ever been about. I'm not trying to be Jesus. I'm trying to show people what it might have been like to meet him, to walk with him, to be challenged and changed by him. And if even one person comes closer to God because of the chosen, then every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt was worth it." The studio erupted, not with polite applause, but with genuine, thunderous approval. People were standing now, some clapping, some crying, some simply overcome by the profound authenticity of what they had just witnessed. Even Sarah Haynes wiped tears from her eyes. Alyssa Farah Griffin nodded vigorously, clearly moved. Joy Behar sat back in her chair, momentarily speechless. She had come armed with skepticism and cynicism, weapons that usually served her well in dismantling religious guests. But those weapons were useless against genuine faith backed by genuine humility. She had tried to trap Jonathan Roumie in contradictions and expose him as a hypocrite. Instead, she had given him a platform to deliver one of the most powerful testimonies about faith ever broadcast on mainstream television. But Joy wasn't quite done. Even as the audience applause died down, even as she recognized that she had been outmaneuvered, she couldn't resist one final jab. "That's all very touching," she said, her voice heavy with sarcasm. "But at the end of the day, you're still just an actor reading lines someone else wrote. You're not a theologian. You're not a priest. You dropped out of high school. What makes you think you're qualified to represent Jesus to millions of people?" The attack was personal and vicious. Joy had just questioned Jonathan's education, his credentials, his very right to speak about faith with authority. It was the kind of elitist dismissal that had become her trademark, the suggestion that certain topics were only for certain people, and actors who played Jesus didn't make the cut. The studio fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different, dangerous, expectant. Jonathan Roumie's expression changed for the first time. Not to anger, but to something more profound. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made the very air seem heavier. "Joy, you're absolutely right about one thing," he began, his voice steady and strong. I'm not a theologian. I'm not a priest. I didn't go to seminary or get advanced degrees in biblical studies. He stood up slowly, the movement commanding everyone's attention. The cameras scrambled to adjust to the new framing. But let me tell you what I am, he continued, his voice rising with passionate conviction. I'm a man who was completely broke 6.5 years ago. I woke up one morning with no food, no money, no prospects, and no hope. I was on government assistance that had run out. I had tried everything in my power to make my acting career work, and I had failed at every turn. The confession was raw and vulnerable, but Jonathan wasn't seeking pity. He was building towards something. And in that moment of absolute destitution, I did the only thing I hadn't tried. I surrendered everything to God. Not the polite, comfortable surrender of someone who's doing fine and wants to do a little better. The desperate surrender of someone who has run out of options and has nowhere else to turn. His voice grew stronger, more powerful with each word. I said, God, you take this. It's in your hands now. I want whatever you want for me, because clearly, I don't know what I'm doing. And that very day, I experienced a financial miracle that didn't make sense on paper. 3 months later, The Chosen came along. 3 months. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. So you ask what qualifies me to portray Jesus? Jonathan's voice filled the studio now, resonating with unshakable conviction. I'll tell you what qualifies me. I know what it's like to be broken. I know what it's like to be lost. I know what it's like to struggle and fail and fall flat on your face. And I know what it's like to experience grace that you absolutely don't deserve, mercy that makes no logical sense, and love that transforms everything. He turned to look directly at Joy, his eyes blazing with passion but not anger. You're right that I'm not qualified on paper. But neither were the disciples. They were fishermen and tax collectors and regular people with no credentials and no education. But Jesus chose them anyway. Not because they were qualified, but because they were willing. Not because they were perfect, but because they were surrendered. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Jonathan wasn't finished. And that's what frustrates me most about this conversation, Joy. Not the skepticism. I actually appreciate honest skepticism. What frustrates me is the suggestion that faith is only valid if it's credentialed and academic, and approved by the right institutions. The Jesus I know didn't spend his time with religious scholars and theologians. He spent it with sinners and outcasts, and broken people who knew they needed saving. His voice softened slightly, but lost none of its power. I struggle to follow Jesus every single day. I fail regularly. I get it wrong more often than I get it right. But I keep trying because I actually believe he's real. And I believe his message matters more than anything else in this world. Not because it's politically convenient or culturally acceptable, but because I've experienced his grace in my own life, and I want other people to experience it too. The studio was electric with energy. The audience sat transfixed, many openly weeping. Even the crew members had stopped their work, drawn in by the raw power of what was unfolding. This had transcended television. It had become something closer to a revival meeting. Whoopi Goldberg finally found her voice, clearly moved by what she had just witnessed. Jonathan, that was really powerful. I think we all. But Joy interrupted, her voice sharp with defensiveness. Okay, but let's not get carried away here. You're still making millions of dollars off this show. You're still a celebrity. You're still living a comfortable life while playing someone who told people to give up everything and follow him. Isn't that hypocritical? The attack was desperate now, Joy grasping for anything that might undermine the profound testimony she had just heard. But Jonathan Roumie wasn't rattled. If anything, he seemed energized, passionate, alive with conviction. Joy, do you know why The Chosen is different from almost every other religious entertainment project? He asked, his voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than defensiveness. It's the first multi-season show about Jesus ever made, and it's completely crowdfunded. No studio wanted to touch it. No network thought it would work. So regular people, Christians and non-Christians alike, invested their own money because they believed in what we were trying to do. He gestured emphatically as he spoke. And every dollar I make from this show, I'm grateful for. Not because it makes me wealthy, but because it means I get to keep doing this work. I get to keep telling these stories. I get to keep pointing people towards something bigger than themselves. The money isn't the point. It's never been the point. The point is that God took someone who was completely broken and completely unqualified, and he used that brokenness to reach people who are also broken. Sarah Haynes jumped in, clearly trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. I think what's so powerful about The Chosen is how relatable it makes these biblical figures. Can you talk about— No, wait. Joy interrupted again, her frustration evident now. She had lost control of this interview completely, and she knew it. I want to push back on something. You keep talking about grace and mercy and love, but what about accountability? What about the harm done in the name of religion? What about all the people hurt by the church? It was a fair question, but the way Joy asked it with barely concealed hostility and obvious agenda revealed that she wasn't really seeking an answer. She was seeking ammunition. But Jonathan Roumie treated it as a genuine question, worthy of a genuine answer. You're absolutely right to bring that up, he said, his voice filled with compassion rather than defensiveness. The church has hurt people. Religious institutions have failed spectacularly in representing Christ. I'm not going to defend that or minimize it. He paused, his expression reflecting genuine sorrow. But here's the thing that people often miss. The failings of the church don't invalidate the truth of Christ. When Christians act in hateful, judgmental, exclusionary ways, they're not being faithful to Jesus, they're betraying him. The Jesus we see in Scripture spent most of his time confronting religious hypocrites who used faith as a weapon to control and condemn people. His voice grew stronger, more passionate. That's exactly why The Chosen matters. We're showing a Jesus who ate with sinners, who touched lepers, who defended prostitutes, who challenged power structures, who prioritized people over rules. That's not some liberal reinterpretation, that's literally what the Gospels say. And if that makes some religious people uncomfortable, then maybe they need to reread their Bibles. The audience erupted again, this time with applause and shouts of agreement. Even Whoopi was nodding vigorously, clearly moved by Jonathan's words. Alyssa Farah Griffin looked like she wanted to stand up and cheer. Joy Behar sat silently for a moment, clearly recognizing that every attack she launched was being turned into an opportunity for Jonathan to deliver another powerful testimony. She had come into this interview expecting to expose a hypocritical actor exploiting faith for profit. Instead, she had encountered genuine conviction backed by genuine humility, and there was simply no weapon in her arsenal that could penetrate that combination. But Joy had one more card to play. One final attempt to regain control of the narrative and expose what she saw as the fundamental problem with religious entertainment. Okay, Jonathan, she said, her voice taking on a more measured tone, as if preparing for a decisive strike. Let me ask you something direct. Do you actually believe Jesus performed miracles? Do you believe he literally rose from the dead? Or is this all just metaphor and mythology that makes for good storytelling? The question was designed to trap him. If he said yes, he would be exposed as a religious fanatic who believes in magic and superstition. If he said no, he would be revealed as a fraud who doesn't actually believe what he's portraying. It was a classic forced choice, designed to make him look foolish either way. But Jonathan Roumie didn't hesitate for even a second. Yes, he said simply, his voice carrying absolute conviction. I believe Jesus performed miracles. I believe he rose from the dead. I believe every single thing the Gospels say about him. The studio held its collective breath. This was the moment when Jonathan would either retreat into qualified statements and careful caveats, or stand firm in conviction that millions of secular viewers would consider absurd. He stood firm. I don't believe it because it's convenient or comfortable, Jonathan continued, his voice rising with passionate intensity. I believe it because I've experienced miracles in my own life. Not magic tricks or parlor games, but genuine divine intervention that can't be explained by coincidence or luck. He turned to address the camera directly, speaking not to Joy or the panel, but to the millions watching at home. 6.5 years ago, I should have been homeless. I should have been destitute. I should have given up and moved back home in defeat. But the moment I surrendered everything to God, things changed. Not gradually, not eventually, immediately. That same day. His voice cracked with emotion. And I'm not just talking about The Chosen. I'm talking about peace that replaced anxiety, purpose that replaced emptiness, hope that replaced despair. Those are miracles too. And if God can do that in my life, if he can take someone as broken and unqualified as me and use me for his purposes, then yes, I absolutely believe he can raise people from the dead. The audience was on its feet now, applause thundering through the studio. Several people were openly weeping. Even some of the crew members were clapping. The energy in the room had completely transformed from skeptical confrontation to something approaching a spiritual experience. Joy Behar looked around at the audience reaction with visible frustration. She had tried everything in her arsenal: skepticism, mockery, personal attacks, intellectual dismissal, moral accusations, and nothing had worked. Every attempt to corner Jonathan Roumie had backfired spectacularly, giving him another opportunity to deliver powerful testimony that resonated with believers and skeptics alike. Whoopi Goldberg, sensing that the interview had reached its natural conclusion, tried to wrap things up. "Jonathan, this has been really powerful. I think we all—" "Wait," Joy interrupted one final time, her voice sharp with desperation. "I just want to say one more thing. Jonathan, you seem like a sincere person. I genuinely believe you believe what you're saying. But don't you think it's dangerous to promote faith so aggressively in a pluralistic society? Don't you worry that you're contributing to division and intolerance?" It was Joy's final shot, her last attempt to frame Jonathan's conviction as something threatening rather than admirable. The suggestion was clear. Genuine faith wasn't just wrong, it was dangerous. Jonathan Roumie looked at Joy with an expression of pure compassion. No anger, no judgment, just genuine love for someone who clearly couldn't understand what drove him. "Joy," he said softly, his voice filled with kindness, "I'm not promoting faith aggressively. I'm sharing my story. I'm portraying a historical figure who billions of people believe changed the world. And I'm doing it with as much authenticity and conviction as I can muster." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "You call it dangerous. I call it necessary. Because the truth is, people are hurting. They're broken. They're searching for meaning and purpose and hope in a world that seems increasingly chaotic and meaningless. And when they watch The Chosen and see a Jesus who loves them, who accepts them, who died for them not because they earned it, but because they're precious to him, that changes lives." His voice grew stronger, more passionate. "I've heard from people who were on the verge of suicide who found hope through The Chosen. I've heard from atheists who started questioning their assumptions. I've heard from believers who fell away from faith and came back home. I've heard from people of different religions who said they gained a new appreciation for Jesus even if they don't worship him." He looked directly at Joy. "So is that dangerous? I don't think so. I think what's dangerous is a world where we're so afraid of genuine conviction that we dismiss anyone who actually believes in something as a fanatic or a threat. I think what's dangerous is cynicism that mocks faith without offering anything better to replace it." The final words landed like a hammer. Joy Behar sat speechless, her mouth slightly open, no comeback prepared for such a profound and devastating response. She had come into this interview as the predator, planning to expose and humiliate a religious actor who she assumed would be an easy target. Instead, she had encountered something she couldn't understand and couldn't defeat: genuine faith backed by genuine transformation. Jonathan Roumie gathered his belongings slowly, deliberately. The interview was clearly over, and everyone in the studio knew it. But before he left, he did something remarkable. He walked over to Joy Behar and extended his hand. "Thank you for this conversation," he said, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "I mean that. Because even when we disagree, even when it's uncomfortable, these conversations matter. They force us to examine what we really believe and why we believe it." Joy took his hand hesitantly, clearly thrown off balance by his kindness in the face of her hostility. "And Joy," Jonathan continued, his voice soft, but carrying throughout the studio, "if you ever want to actually watch The Chosen, not to critique it or analyze it, but just to see what millions of people are responding to, I'd love to hear what you think. Really. Because I have a feeling you might be surprised." With that, he turned and walked off the set to sustained applause that lasted well after the cameras stopped rolling. He didn't storm off dramatically. He didn't deliver a cutting final remark. He simply left with grace, with dignity, with the same peaceful confidence he had displayed from the beginning. Joy Behar sat silently for several seconds after his departure, her expression unreadable. The other hosts looked at each other uncertainly, unsure how to process what had just happened. This wasn't how these confrontations usually went. Typically, religious guests either collapsed under pressure or responded with defensive anger that confirmed secular stereotypes. Jonathan Roumie had done neither. He had simply stood firm in his convictions, while maintaining compassion for those who opposed him. As the show cut to commercial, the audience continued buzzing with energy. People compared notes on what they had just witnessed. Some pulled out their phones to search for The Chosen, curious about a show they had previously dismissed as religious propaganda. Others sat quietly, clearly moved by something they couldn't quite articulate. What started as The View's latest attempt to challenge and expose religious hypocrisy had become something else entirely, a testimony so powerful, so authentic, and so grounded in genuine transformation that it transcended typical television conflict. Jonathan Roumie hadn't just defended his faith, he had demonstrated it. He hadn't just talked about grace, he had embodied it. The video of the interview went viral within hours, racking up millions of views across multiple platforms. Conservative commentators praised Jonathan's courage in standing firm against secular hostility. Progressive Christians celebrated his emphasis on Jesus as champion of the marginalized. Atheists and skeptics admitted grudging respect for his authenticity, even if they disagreed with his beliefs. And countless viewers, people who had never heard of The Chosen or Jonathan Roumie, found themselves moved by something genuine in a world that often feels plastic and manufactured. Critics accused The View of hostile bias against religious guests. Defenders argued that Joy's questions were fair and necessary. But everyone agreed on one thing. They had witnessed something extraordinary, something rare, something that would be discussed and debated for years to come. Did Joy Behar go too far in her questioning? Was Jonathan Roumie's faith authentic or just good marketing? Can an actor truly represent Jesus without exploiting believers? Does genuine religious conviction have a place in secular entertainment? These questions continue to resonate. But perhaps the most important question is this. In a culture that increasingly treats faith as something embarrassing or dangerous, what happens when someone stands up and says, "I believe," without apology or qualification? Jonathan Roumie showed us what happens. And Joy Behar learned, perhaps for the first time in her career, that genuine faith backed by genuine humility is the most powerful force on earth. It can't be mocked. It can't be dismissed. It can't be defeated. It can only be witnessed. And millions of people witnessed it that day. The real Jesus? He'd be proud.